Hi, this is Ryan. Before we get started, I just want to give you a heads up. Originally, we'd planned to just release everything as one long podcast. It ran a bit long, so please bear with us. To make things a little bit easier on everybody, I'm going to go ahead and break this into two podcasts. Still learning how we're doing this, so bear with us as we sort everything out. Thanks so much. Let's go ahead and get started. Hi, you've reached the Signal Watch. Film, comics, television, sci-fi, superheroes, noir, history, and more. Join us as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hi, we are back for another installment. I am Ryan Steens.
I'm Amy Cavender.
And we have just about 30 minutes ago, 45 minutes ago, finished watching 50 Shades Freed, the third installment in the 50 Shades saga. I felt like we should have clasped hands like Thelma and Louise at the beginning of the movie. As we headed towards the epic conclusion.
You know, I think that would have only fostered the impression that I was already deeply resentful about, which was the theater staff seemed to be thinking that I had dragged you to this.
That's true.
Which was deeply, deeply troubling.
We went to a Sunday 2:20 show, and there were a number of couples in the audience, and you always wonder what the story is there. And of course there were, as had been true when we'd seen the two prior movies in the theater, lots of groups of women of all ages together.
Yeah. And interestingly, they all converged in the bathroom afterwards. And there was a lot of chatter in the bathroom about this film, including the personal thing where I was like so glad I was making eye contact with my phone. I overheard this one gal who was like, "Oh, it was so good. I'm just really sad that it's the last one." And I was just like, you can't see me obviously if you're listening to this, but I was kind of in this weird state of snicker shock where I was just like, I want to laugh so hard because that was such a dumb thing to say, but on the other hand, it's a matter of taste and I shouldn't judge. But yeah,
but it is what it is. We knew these movies weren't for us going in. 3 movies later, that has borne out, but a lot of people like them. I was reading somewhere this is a $1 billion franchise. Amy and I have not talked about the movie. We talked about the weather. We talked about all sorts of things before we fired up the microphone. And before we actually get into the plot of this film, when I posted last time, you may have found this on SoundCloud. I also have a blog where I linked this to. And someone asked some questions, and I'm going to try and quote from that. I'm just going to go ahead and read straight through what were kind of a number of questions and try and generate a little bit of thought here. Jake asked, what stirred your interest in these films? Obviously, you don't think much of these movies in terms of storytelling and filmmaking. Is it the cultural commentary? And went on to ask, given the prominence of recent issues you mentioned with regards to the Me Too movement, we didn't juxtapose this necessarily against the immense popularity of the books and films. Right. So my answer would actually be buried a little bit right in the question you asked, and that's, I'm very interested in anything that's this popular. When I went to go vote, oh man, I know it was a presidential election. I'm assuming it was 2000. What would that have been? 2012. the woman who checked me in was sitting there reading 50 Shades of Grey and would not put it down. And then I went and flew for work shortly after that, and bore witness to the solid wall of 50 Shades books that were in the airport. And someone then told me that they were this adapted fan fiction from Twilight. I'd seen Twilight. I thought Twilight was this bizarrely problematic series aimed at young adults. And if you've not seen it, we talked a little bit about you talked, Amy, a little bit about the stalkeriness of Edward, I think, in the last podcast, or else we talked about it while we were drinking wine and watching the movie. I don't remember. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Edward basically is this stalker guy who's threatening to murder Bella through the first movie, or that's a threat of something that could happen. And there's a lot of echoes of domestic abuse in that, and it's all played up as being very romantic and bad boy dangerous. And I don't want to just go to the movie to watch a movie and just do the shame finger, but I find it the cultural conversation that goes on to be at odds with how the large masses of people consuming pop culture seem to be totally comfortable. If you can have a book that's a runaway bestseller like Twilight, and then it's fan fiction in 50 Shades, both of which play up these things, there's something interesting going on there. And I of course would go because, I'm a snotty jerk and I think I'm better than other people, and I want to go prove it by watching a movie and going, haha, I watched it and it sucked. But it is an interesting cultural phenomenon. Amy, I've talked plenty.
It's okay. I was picking up what you were putting down. I think that one of the things that's really interesting about this is that you don't hear a whole lot of people in circles that I run in defending 50 Shades of Grey as something with literary or cinematic merit. But yet, how can it make so much money if there aren't people that find it valuable or interesting? Was that lady in the bathroom a plant? No, probably not. No. She was probably there of her own volition, not trying to do some kind of weird bathroom viral marketing.
After the fact.
Right, after the movie. And I think that so the big issue that I have that makes this thorny for me is that when you think about pop culture that's quote unquote for guys, and please know that I fully am putting that in quotes. Die Hard. That's a classic film. That's an awesome film.
Yeah.
It's a guy movie. Mm-hmm. And then when you look at pop culture, and also we should lump in Batman movies that Nolan did and all this other stuff. That's like, oh, those are so good. That's so great. Rah, rah, rah. And then it's also a fantasy, and it's also got excesses because a lot of people get punched in the face. A lot of people get killed. A lot of people get thrown out of windows. That's not normal behavior. That's not what we want to encourage in people, but it's an excess that we think is okay.
Right.
So when we look at pop culture for women that's intended to be equally escapist or equally fantastical, like romance novels, Twilight, this shit, it's trash.
Right.
And that is interesting because of the fact that, guy stuff, super rad. And the kind of pendulum swing to the more feminine fantasy fulfillment stuff is trash. And sometimes it is trash. That's the thing. That's the kicker of it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it just is. Wow. We walked into a thorny place. But I mean, immediately my mind went to Chuck Norris movies from Canon, right? I mean, as it always does. But if you go to Invasion USA or the stuff I watched in middle school that I should not have been because it was all deeply rated R. It's that same male masculine fantasy of a pair of Uzis, and a 45 in a holster. You're going to stop, the commie Nazis from taking over Florida or whatever was happening. I don't remember the plot of Invasion USA too well. But it's garbage. I mean, and I think it was regarded as such. And so there's a polish to some of, but it's also, I know what love I will express for Commando. I've spent days of my life thinking about Commando at this point. I mean, just on a number of reviewings and talking to people about it, driving to the theater to see it. It's a terrible movie. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from with this.
Yeah, and so that puts me in an odd position, because there's a lot of what I fully recognize as, kind of traditional femininity wish fulfillment in these movies. There's flowers everywhere, hot dude with a little bit of scruff plays piano, great big bathtubs for two, all that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, okay, those are the equivalent of a Batarang and a Bat car and a Bat helicopter.
And there is a bat car and bat helicopter.
Pretty much. It's an Audi and an actual helicopter, but it does have a logo on the side for a multimillionaire who's kind of mentally obsessed with certain things. So yeah, there are some similarities there, but that's the thing that's kind of it's. I don't want to shame other women for it. I don't want to. I want to avoid the same thing you want to avoid, which is how dare you like this thing I don't like. But on the other hand, there's some stuff that's severely messed up in these films, and a lot of it goes down to consent, and a lot of it goes down to this really kind of like troubling dynamic where we see something that I think intellectually, when people, think about it in real world terms, very much plays into the Me Too movement, which is some men do egregious things to women and they get away with it for some reason. And the reason in some cases can be because they're just so damn cute. And in other cases, they get away with it because of the whole he said, she said, and people are, there was a long-standing tendency for people to believe the guy.
Cosby, for decades, right?
Yeah. And, or to, maybe they don't disbelieve the woman, but they don't care. It's like, yeah, he probably did that. Oh, well, shrug. He's a great director. And that's... When I watch this, I think about those things because Christian Grey, to recap, in the first film, he broke into Anna's apartment, he straight up stole her car and sold it and then gave her another car, and somehow the giving of the new car makes up for the stealing of the old car. And, he got away with it because she was attracted to him. Mm-hmm. If someone that she wasn't attracted to had broken into her apartment and stolen her car, would have been a whole different thing. Yeah. The actions are only acceptable due to the attractiveness of the person doing it.
One of the things that I, through comments they made in this movie, if we're to believe their timeline, I was thinking about it in relation to something else that they said, but I don't think the entire movie took place, all three movies took place in a period of longer than about 5 or 6 months.
Right, because they had referred to Hyde, the former editor, then spurned lover of Ms. Steele, now Miss Grey, a few weeks ago. Like the big incident that got him fired was a few weeks prior to the events of the film, which was when they got married. And that was a really lavish-looking wedding for having a few weeks of planning.
You got your $1 billion. I guess you can fly in all the stuff you need at the last minute.
I guess.
Yeah. So one of the things I think most, I'm going to back up that I don't know what other people think. One of the things I wondered was, and I think maybe we talked about this last time, but there's not much in the way of erotica out there for women maybe to feel that they can consume. For lack of pornography that is appealing to women on a mass scale, what does this serve that same function? It is very different from pornography, in it or I don't know. In there's a relationship there. It's something that's ongoing and serialized. There are characters who are somewhat building. It's not, the plumber showing up and, a couple of quick lines and then, move on to the act. And there's all sorts of pornography, so I don't want to overgeneralize too much. And I know that's a terrible stereotype of pornography, but there's there's a lot of sex in these, and I know I'm hemming and hawing. I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to say, other than does it fill that need? Does it fill that same niche?
That's a great question, and the answer is I don't know, because I've always been pretty comfortable with just like using the internet for porn and also cat pictures, and then occasionally for banking. So I can imagine a person where this is the spiciest stuff they've seen. Mm-hmm. I can totally imagine that, but it's hard for me to put myself in that particular place, because I've been on the internet since like 96.
Right.
And I saw some stuff, man.
Sure.
But yeah, and I think that you're right in that there's a certain amount of social acceptability. And I think this was especially true when people didn't really know exactly what it was. Mm-hmm. Because when you think about the kind of, what used to be referred to, and probably still is referred to as bodice ripper, mm-hmm. kind of novels, those existed. And I'm not putting out any laundry here, but my mom loved that stuff. My mom loved romance novels, mm-hmm. and the Fabio covers, and then some of the spicier ones where the guy maybe had a facial scar and was kind of a sexy pirate, and there's some stuff happening around sexy pirate business. Piles and piles of those books. And I tried one out once. Wasn't for me. Didn't have enough space in it. Didn't have enough, elves or whatever. It was just not my jam. But but there was some sex.
Yeah.
Yep, it was there. But they had very distinctive visuals that, they all had the ripped dudes on the cover holding a woman in a torn dress, and there's wind and all this kind of stuff, and that aesthetic was kind of a point of comedy.
Right.
Because you would see in movies and stuff, kind of like you were talking about the election worker who was reading 50 Shades. It would be kind of a joke in some TV shows and movies that people would be kind of buried in these romance novels while their marriages were falling apart or their house was a mess or mm-hmm. whatever. And these had a different look to them. When you think about the covers, they all have a very uniform look, and it's kind of subdued. It's black and white. And initially, when people didn't know what they were, nobody would know what they were.
Right.
It was not the same kind of pastel oil painting look that was associated with a lot of writing that was for women.
Yeah.
For many years. So I think that there were aspects of it that made it acceptable porn, not only because of the marketing or whatever, but also because of the actual packaging at the time.
Right.
And
the posters have followed that same. I mean, everyone knows what it is now, but they've not gone for the Fabio stuff necessarily.
Right. If you looked at the images from the books, it's kind of context free, and that was similar with the Twilight books actually, because they were black covers with an object and then a fairly stark font. Mm-hmm. And this is also true with the 50 Shades stuff, and I think that that's part of what made them sort of initially ubiquitous, because they came in this kind of packaging equivalent of a brown paper wrapper.
Yeah.
It could have been anything. It could have been a book on how to buy ties or something.
Right.
and it was, they are distinctly unfeminine looking, actually.
That's true.
And that makes it that adds a whole other layer. And I think that another thing that's kind of fascinating to me is how much of what they're trying to go for with the design, if I'm saying they're trying to go for, what I think that they're trying to go for is to evoke class and wealth. And I think that's one of the things that distinguishes the controlling, weird, creepy behavior of Christian Grey versus the controlling, weird, creepy behavior of, what's his name, Jack Hyde.
Jack Hyde.
You know, when you really look at their behavior, their attitudes towards Anastasia, et cetera, the big difference is that one of them has a helicopter. They're both awful. Really. One of them just happens to be extremely rich.
I had the passing thought, definitely an angle of evil opposites that you get a lot in other genre fiction that pops up in this between Jack Hyde and Christian, that very specifically addresses what you're talking about. I don't know if E.L. James intended for it to, other than her kind of riffing on what's common in other things she liked. Yeah, I don't think it was any kind of social commentary. I do want to circle back to the Me Too stuff. And I think Jake had been asking, we talked about this being kind of a 2014 view but now it's 2018. And I think, we've talked a lot about that already. And I think you had something you wanted to talk about somewhat specifically.
Yeah. So, I understand why the person asking the question wanted us to, more explicitly explore Me Too, because, the point that was made was that this was an early noughties kind of approach to consent in relationships between men and women. And now, in really the past few months, there's been kind of a tide that is turning with the Me Too movement being part of it. And in my mind, we've been talking about it the whole time. Because when we talk about wealth and privilege, that's part of what made the Me Too movement, necessary, is that people are acting from positions of wealth and privilege and hurting other people. And similarly, when we talk about consent, meaningful consent, not just, I guess you can so I can have a job, or I guess you can so I can have, a diamond bracelet, that's talking about the Me Too movement as well. Because when you look at the people who have been, identified by, in some cases, many, many people as being offenders, people who have committed sexual assault, people who have committed harassment, people who have done horrendous things to other people, it's almost entirely done from a place of privilege, where they have control over someone's career, they have control over someone's material comfort or resources, or their ability to gain resources, their ability to gain work or maintain their work. The reason why people were able to be predators was because of wealth and power. And that's the thing that made their behavior quote unquote acceptable to the larger society, or, to the individual involved, at least for a while.
Yeah. You think about the Harvey Weinstein thing. One of the things that's most mind-boggling about it, to me, is it wasn't just him. He had assistants who apparently knew something of what was going on, who were helping him bring these young women and actors up to his hotel rooms, who had to have known something was going on, whether they knew it was consensual or not. Not it always seemingly in a way that the person being led up there had no idea what was going on. And you kind of look at Christian Grey, and he has this, his security detail, he has the housekeeper, he has all of these people who, except for maybe his mother, who, and she finds out in the second movie, and it's never mentioned again, who kind of, help him get through, I think they stated, 24 young women during the past however many years. Can't have been that long. I think they said he's less than 30 in the first movie.
Right. And once again, it's acceptable solely because he's cute and rich. And that's, that's a horrible message. It's in, one of them was so obsessed with him that she was willing to commit violence against someone else to regain her place in his affections, or to avenge the loss of her limited position to someone who is granted more of a position. Maybe this universe, maybe this world works differently than the one that we live in some ways. But it wasn't. If these things were happening to a friend of mine, if I was Kate, Anna's friend in the movie, I'd be like, get out, you should go.
But then you stood in the bathroom. I didn't know this until we started recording,
Yep.
and everyone was very much on board with how romantic and how much they wanted to continue on with these characters.
Yep. I could not wrap my head around that, because as you recall, when we walked in here and saw Jamie, I was like, our long national nightmare is over. We're finally done watching these freaking movies. But it was, people were happy. People, I say people, what I mean is people in the women's bathroom were happy. Some of them came in, little groups, and they had a good old time with it. And, I get it in some ways, because wouldn't it be neat if there was like this hot dude who was just, going to take care of you forever, and you could work because you wanted to, and you could have a job that you enjoyed because that was just what you wanted to do. Wouldn't that be great? Mm-hmm. And you could look at this narrative in that way, but you could also look at it as like, wow, this dude is scary.
And not once is that raised across 3 movies.
Not really. And that's the thing that's also kind of interesting, because her parents apparently have no problem with this. Mm-hmm. None of her friends are saying like, hey, pump the brakes. How did you end up married 6 weeks after, or, maybe 3 months after you met this guy? Like, this was never treated as anything other than a, like, oh, this is so great. He's so rich. Girl, he's rich. And,
right.
and it's just like, look at that rock. And that's all cool, but it's also, did she not tell anybody about her car? Did she not tell anybody that he keeps on popping up? How did he find her when she was drunk that night, like a couple of days after they had met? How did nobody remark upon this to her, or kind of just scratch their head a little bit and wonder what was going on? And that's the thing that I think also kind of ties into the whole Me Too thing, is that it's very easy to not notice when things are going wrong, when people are in relationships, because I think a lot of people put a lot of effort into maintaining normalcy, mm-hmm. or trying to avoid conflict. And we saw this kind of come to a head with Me Too, and we're also seeing this kind of come to a head in our community because of what's going on with Alamo Drafthouse around the sexual harassment and sexual assault allegations that have been levied against customers and former staffers, and then the way that those allegations were handled by the folks at the Alamo was not necessarily satisfactory,
right,
to put it mildly. And in some cases, it was actually really kind of cruel. And that's a whole other kettle of fish there. I remember reading the stuff about the Devin Faraci, I'm not sure how to say his name, who was working for the Alamo's kind of web magazine, Birth Movies Death, and the way that they handled his harassment of a colleague was, initially they let him go and he went into treatment, and then they hired him back to do some kind of diminished duties, which can't have felt good for anybody that had knowledge of the reason why he was initially let go, and can't have felt safe. And there was a certain irony when we were watching this movie in that, like they go out of their way every single time to have like some kind of cute little catchy short about like how you should shut up in the theater because it's such an important place. And in this particular instance, they had Melissa McCarthy do this thing where she's working out with these two shirtless dudes, and she's in like a sweater and a hat that says boss, and it's like super cute. She's kind of doing her Melissa McCarthy thing. And it was actually kind of an interesting inverse of the film that we were about to watch, because she was kind of blinged out and, had these guys kind of tending to her. And at one point, one of them was like touching her abs, I guess, to see if her core was activated or something. And she moves his hand onto her breast.
Yeah.
And someone could write a lot about what it means for an overweight woman to have two buff guys and ask, place one of their hands on her breast. Like, there's a lot of kind of interesting... It was interesting. And it was kind of a paradox given what we were about to see.
Yeah.
Because in that case, her wealth and prestige may or may not have influenced his decision to let his hand stay there. Who knows? I don't know. It was just kind of a head scratcher. But, here we are. It was an interesting inversion of the dynamic that we were about to see explored.
Yeah. The Alamo is going through a lot right now, and there's a few articles out there on it. There was some stuff that came out before Christmas or so. Some of that got summarized, and then there was some additional new content that showed up in an article that came out, I guess, last week. What's the day today? I don't even know what day it is. We'll say it's the 11th.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So it was sometime in the past, in early February.
Dan Solomon wrote it for Splinter, and it came out on Thursday.
I've had a number of people send it to me because they know I'm a Alamo diehard, and it's challenging to know exactly how to react to. I want to make clear, no one's accusing the owners of the Alamo of direct assault, but the Faraci story is entirely backed up by fact. And apparently there may be something else to that, given some hints that were in that story. Then there was some additional content. I'm trying to remember. From a manager who had had multiple incidents with a customer, and it had been more or less swept under the rug by management. There is a reason, as I had, in looking at the article, had said, there's a reason people have HR departments in the Alamo with pros running them, and the Alamo learned way too late that doesn't begin to address or forgive. But if you're ever growing a company, start with HR. How about that?
Right. Because
with no policy, anyway.
Yeah, but that's part of the whole Me Too thing too, because one of the things that has come up over and over again in the coverage, and I'm not. It's saddening to me because I love the Alamo.
Yeah.
Even when I go see terrible movies there, I do love the experience. But it was particularly crushing in the piece that came out on Thursday that Dan Solomon did. The kind of in-depth discussion about how Carrie Leak handled stuff.
Yeah. Gosh, this is getting way off of 50 Shades.
But, is it though? Are you sure?
Yeah. But it's
HR is so kinky.
Yeah. But I guess, again, this gets back to don't try and why it's good to have policy and HR in place. Reading some of that, and this is why the Me Too thing and normalizing everything and everything you said is so true. You read kind of what they said and what they were thinking, and you think of it from a they thought they were helping this challenged customer while totally hanging their employee in the wind. And part of me knows was probably, given Austin how that would have been treated in the mental health community had they bounced the guy. But part of me also knows, hey, this is an incredibly difficult situation, and you side with your employee on this.
Right.
I guess I've been in enough management positions where I was like, oh, I see how they made that mistake. But some of the other stuff, it was just their inexperience, but it just piles up if you don't take care of it. And that's what's happening now.
Right.
It's 2 decades of that.
Right. And that's the kind of sad reality of the situation that we find ourselves in as a culture, is that for so many years people were just kind of like, well, it was isolated, or at least what he did wasn't violent, or at least, I shouldn't say he, it's not always a he, sometimes it's a she or they, but whatever was done to you was, it's not that big a deal. They just touched you, you weren't stabbed. Get a grip. And it's like, well, violence often escalates, and someone grabbing you by the arm and pulling you back, or someone like keeping you from leaving a place, that is sometimes how people get hurt.
Yeah.
Just because you didn't get hurt that time doesn't mean that you won't get hurt if that happens in the future. That could be part of a sequence of events that ends up with you dead. And that's, there's always this pressure to minimize and to forgive and to not mess up someone else's future while sacrificing your own.
Yeah. And I think the word you used in there that it really stuck out to me was isolated incident. Like, that I'm sure is how they would treat, but it's, cumulatively over 20 years, it ain't that.
Right. It's a culture. It's a company culture, and it's a larger culture that does the exact same thing.
Yeah.
All this outrage and all these stories, this is an accumulation of hurt and an accumulation of what people didn't even realize was bad behavior. And I shouldn't say almost, I do feel a certain amount of pity for the people involved that have been identified as harassing or attacking or whatever, especially the ones that could theoretically be classed as quote unquote non-violent. Because we've all grown up with cultural messages of like, if you just keep at it, she'll turn your way and she'll see you and it'll be great. John Cusack holding up the jam box kind of thing. You just got to keep at it. You're going to wear her down. It's going to be great.
Right.
Or you just, and that's what we've been soaking in for a long time. And that's the narrative that people get about relationships, and, just persist, be forceful, get all Harrison Ford on her and grab her face and kiss her. And that doesn't always really work.
Are you saying
reality.
Don't just grab people and kiss them?
I'm saying, if you aim for the throne, you best not miss, that kind of stuff. That's the thing. Like, we don't necessarily give people a good toolbox for actually relating to each other. If you learn about relationships from movies, wow, you're in for it.
Yeah.
You're going to have some problems.
So what I want to do is I can use my musical interlude again, and you and I can take a break, and then we can cycle back to the plot and what actually happened in 50 Shades Freed, because I really want to talk about Jack Hyde.
Let's do it.
All right. And maybe the dogs won't be constantly circling us and making loud noises we have to edit out.
That would be exciting.
Okay. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with us. As I mentioned at the top of this podcast, we are going to break this extra long podcast into 2 segments, so please look for segment 2 coming very soon. That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. I've been your host, Ryan Steens. Thanks for sticking with us. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So until next time, God damn it, babies. you've got to be kind.